This is Iran Today.
Before we start tonight's program, we decided to take it to the streets of Queen's University and see what the students knew about the Iranian Revolution.
It was a revolution. That's all I know. I don't know anything about that.
No, I didn't.
Nothing. No.
No.
Wasn't that the revolutions with like the Shah was kicked out by the Americans took him in? He was doing some pretty terrible stuff in Iran.
Not really. Yeah.
I don't know. I actually just have because I just did a reading for politics one time. I don't.
No,
How
I
about
don't.
you?
No, I don't. I'm also
an A.
American, so.
That was over the OPEC crisis, right?
Nothing. I don't know. I know a lot. So what happened was pre-1979, there was a pro-Western Shah, and it was the second Shah, and he got in power after 1953 when the US installed him. So he was very good for the liberal parts. In fact, if you look at 1970s Iran, there were actually gay clubs in downtown Tehran. There were women who were singing without veils or anything. But this actually pissed off a lot of the rural population who was a bit more religious. But in fairness to those people, the Shah was incredibly brutal.
Now that we've heard what the students of Queen's University have to say, let's begin our journey. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi was a highly ambitious man. He dreamt of creating a new Iran, one that led the world in technology, education, intelligence, military, and power. He wanted to push Iran to its limits, as well as westernize and modernize the nation. On his way to this new Iran, he also became an autocratic ruler with absolute power. From the start, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi had a tumultuous reign. He took over as Shah when his father was forced to abdicate in 1941. In 1951, a man by the name of Mohammad Mossadegh was democratically elected as prime minister. He was very popular amongst the population. He was also the first real threat to the Shah's power. Mossadegh was a nationalist. He wanted to nationalize Iranian oil. This was against the plans of the Shah and the West. By nationalizing the oil, Mossadegh would be ending the 40-year, immensely profitable Anglo-Iranian oil company monopoly. The US and Britain did not want this to happen. In 1953, while the Shah was conveniently out of the country, the CIA and MI6 joined in a military coup and overthrew Mossadegh. Many Iranians resented the US for their interference. After the coup of '53, the Shah wanted to establish an internal intelligence agency, and thus the infamous secret police force Savak was formed. In 1963, the Shah launched the White Revolution. This was an ambitious series of reforms focused on modernization and westernization. The Shah hoped to remove the influence of the landlord, and by doing this, the Shah hoped to empower the working class and peasantry and at the same time gain them as an ally. The Shah intended to transform Iran from a feudal society into an industrialized country where the mosque had no say. During this time, the economy was very strong. Many schools were built, and Iran was experiencing many changes. However, not everyone was pleased with the changes made. Traditionalists were outraged by the electoral reforms dictating that women had the right to vote and that non-Muslims could run. A man named Ruhollah Khomeini was especially outraged by this. He was a prominent seminary teacher and cleric, and he saw many things that were dangerous to Shi'ism and the ulama. Khomeini made a speech condemning the reforms and severely criticizing the Shah, denouncing him as a wretched, miserable man. 2 days later, Savak arrested him. Thousands of people then took to the streets to support Khomeini. To the Shah's surprise, many non-clerics joined in the protest. In response, the army retaliated with brute force and opened fire. In 3 days of rioting, there was an estimated 400 deaths. Khomeini was released 2 months later. In 1964, Khomeini made yet another speech denouncing the Shah. This time, it was against his latest policy that allowed members of the U.S. Armed Forces in Iran to be tried in their own military courts. Khomeini was arrested and held for half a year. After refusing to apologize and stand down to Prime Minister Hassan Ali Mansour, Mansour slapped Khomeini against his face and sent him into exile. Ordered out of the country, Khomeini went to Najaf, Iraq. As for Mansour, 2 months later, he was assassinated by supporters of the Ayatollah. The Shah then immediately appointed Amir Abbas Hoveyda as the new prime minister. Under Hoveyda, the economy flourished and Iran enjoyed a seemingly stable period. However, the calm came at a price. Iran was now a police state. There were units everywhere, including one specifically for student activists. In Najaf, Khomeini suggested another government system in the place of the Shah's, a system where the cleric would have complete rule. This alternative system mobilized the people. Meanwhile, the Shah's power grew to unprecedented heights. He and his wife became international celebrities. He was excessively lavish and indulged in lavish parties for foreign dignitaries. In 1968, the Shah and his queen hosted a lavish arts festival celebrating Western arts. This included nude theater and paintings. The progressive nature of this art shocked the people. They saw it as a way to destroy Iranian culture and make young people apolitical. In 1971, Iran held a huge celebration to mark the 2,500 years of the Persian Empire. The royal family was living frivolously while the rest of the nation starved. The gap between rich and poor was becoming a gulf. The Shah's opulence was overshadowing his achievements. He could not foresee a revolt coming. The Shah thought he had a special connection with his people.
Very specific and special relationship between me and my people. This maybe is not very well understood in other countries.
The Shah was intent on turning Iran into a military superpower. In the 70s, he had the best military equipment in the world. Despite their peace agreements, the Shah was certain that Iraq was going to attack Iran. In 1975, Jimmy Carter ran for President of the United States and won. Carter criticized his predecessor Nixon's relationship with Iran. This propelled Iranians to speak up against the Shah. They saw an ally in Washington. During the mid-70s, sky-high oil prices leveled off, leaving many of the projects the Shah had started stalled. This served as tinder for the revolution. It was in early 1978 when the Iranian population began to hear of Khomeini. When his son died from a car accident in late 1977, Khomeini declared this to be a form of martyrdom, and a mourning ceremony in the Ark Mosque of Tehran turned into a political rally. It was this transition that brought Khomeini into the eyes of the public and the Shah. As Khomeini's popularity continued to grow, the Shah feared what it could mean, and on January 7, 1978, the Shah, under a pseudonym, published a slanderous article in the Atelat. In this article, the Shah suggested that Khomeini was a homosexual and an undercover British agent who would gladly turn Iran over to the United Kingdom. While it was the Shah's purpose to diminish the sparks that Khomeini was creating, it turned those sparks into flames. It was first in Qom when a group of religious students began to march in the streets and protest. 2 days later, on January 9th, The organized march turned into a violent rampage, with protesters setting fire to anything they deemed un-Islamic. The police were forced into action, attempting to subdue the crowds. When the threat of their presence proved to be pointless, officers used more forceful actions to end the protest. This resulted with a total of 2 policemen and 6 protesters dead. This number was skewed, however, by Khomeini's exaggeration, stating that 70 people were murdered. As per Arbaeen, a Shiite tradition, mourning was to occur 40 days following one's death. In mosques across the nation, calls were made to honor the dead students. Thus, on February 18th, protests began in various cities across the nation to mourn the dead, support Khomeini, and protest the Shah. The mourners of the victims from Qom consequently used this as a form of rebellion, and while most marches were ended peacefully by the police, this was not the case in the town of Tabriz. The unfortunate death of one marcher caused a full-scale riot to occur. While the activists did not target locations through means of looting, anything that was found to be un-Islamic was burned, similar to the events in Qom. While it took the police 2 days to return the city to its normal control, Tabriz in Iran would never be the same. With 13 shot dead from the Tabriz riot, exaggeration from Khomeini once again took place, claiming that hundreds were martyred. He rallied more supporters, and another cycle of Arbaeen began, with Khomeini declaring more marches to be held for other protesters who had become martyrs. As such, 40 days later, marches were held in almost every major city across Iran. The Shah, fully aware of the power the martyrs were creating, ordered the police to respond to the riots without violence, and under no circumstance should any person be shot. When 5 known supporters of Khomeini were found dead in Yazid, however, tension rose. It is debated if the deaths were at the hands of riot police, or if, as the Shah proposed in his memoir, the corpses had been taken from car accidents nearby. Regardless of the reason, the deaths of the protesters were once again said to be in the hundreds, and opposition against the Shah heightened. While the Shah did his best to appease his opponents, it was to no avail. On May 10th, another cycle began and ended with a reported 27 killed, though once again, the government claimed no bullets had been used. Before the next march could occur on June 17th, Mohammad Kazim Shariatmadari, a senior influential Ayatollah, encouraged protesters to strike rather than march, for fear of a blockade and a rising death toll. Luckily, many people listened to Shariatmadari rather than Khomeini, and the protesters stopped and the crisis was over. So there seemed to be a state of rest in Iran. It was all but fleeting with the horrific tragedy on August 19th at a local cinema in Abadan. This occurrence, which had been the largest terrorist attack prior to September 11, 2001, took 422 lives, when a group of arsonists locked all the exits at the Cinema Rex and then proceeded to set the building on fire. Khomeini immediately blamed the Shah for the fire, and soon chants were being yelled against him. And so, the revolution reignited, and people felt a passion to rally against the Shah. Following the Cinema Rex fire, the opposition grew exponentially. Many people joined either from believing the Shah had instructed the arsonists or from the dire economic state. The government underwent a strict budget cut to attempt to fix the inflation. This resulted in many people losing their jobs, and as such, the middle class, which had once been the Shah's biggest support, now joined with the opposition. Zaghar, realizing the issue he created, offered his resignation and was succeeded by former Prime Minister Jafar Sharif Imami. Together with the Shah, Sharif Imami began to approve all demands made by the protesters in an attempt to appease them. Though this was done in an attempt to stop more riots, it led people to believe the government would fulfill any request, and as such, many of the Shah supporters joined the protests as to receive the same treatment. Under the mobilization of Khomeini, the protest assembled. Beginning on September 4, 1978, the initial protest, which consisted of 100,000 people, took to the streets to say Eid prayers, and then march and protest afterwards. Aware of the severity of the now reoccurring marches, the government had compromised and set a designated protest route, and had asked for the protesters to limit anti-Shah and pro-Khomeini chants. To their dismay, within hours, cheers for the death of the Shah could be heard amongst the yells for Khomeini as their leader. By September 7th, the group had escalated to 500,000, and the Shah realized he had quickly lost Iran. The Shah declared martial law on September 8th. Rioters took to the streets and were met by armed officers. The main group, in Jalal Square in Tehran, came face to face with tanks and soldiers yelling at them to stop the protest. Though it is unclear which side shot first, several shots were fired. Between the armed troops and the protesters who set up blockades and threw Molotov cocktails, this massacre, known as Black Friday, claimed 89 lives. Following the shock of Black Friday, it became evident that any hope of reconciliation between the Shah and his people were gone. In fact, many believed that the Shah never fully recovered from this. Iran was filled with anti-Shah movements, and the government could do nothing to stop it. As the Shah was so strongly against the violent approach, he instead turned to negotiation and appeasement, though with no avail. Many opposed Iranians felt that the Shah had lost his chance to reform and change his ways. They now called for him to leave his office and to make way for Khomeini. Khomeini had up until this point been in exile in Iraq. Under pressure from the Shah, Khomeini was supposed to be moved from Najaf to Kuwait, though he was refused entry. It is believed that after being encouraged by the then Prime Minister of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, Khomeini then moved to France. During this time, he continued to grow, gaining support and making alliances internationally. With many supporters in the streets of Iran, Khomeini was sure to return home. On December 2nd through 11th, an estimated 6.9 million protesters accumulated in Tehran's Azadi Square. This was the largest recorded protest in history. In 1978, Iran was heading through a phase of rebellion. Hundreds were storming into the streets for protests, riots, and strikes that paralyzed the country. This was the beginning of Iran's rise to fundamentalism. The people of Iran were fighting against imperialism under the name of God. At the dawn of the new year in 1979, the Shah, the ruler for the past 3 decades, was ready to leave the country. He was no longer able to control or satisfy the needs of the Iranian citizens. The Shah and his wife left Iran on January 15, 1979, leaving Prime Minister Shapur Bakhtiar in power. Upon the fleeing of the Shah, there seemed to be celebration in the city of Tehran. Many Iranians were faced with a glimpse of hope for their ever-changing country. On February 5th, following the departure of the Shah, Mehdi Barzargan accepted a position within the provisional government. He was one of the few within the revolution that had individual rank and credentials for the position. As well, it is said that he was a true reflection of all involved forces in the Iranian Revolution, including the Islamic liberals, secular nationalists, and progressive clergy. Mehdi Barzargan opposed the Shah, but he also did not take a strong stance for the totalitarian rule of the clergy. Therefore, he still advocated for modern reform, the rule of law, and democratic values within the government. Because he did not have a firm stance on the particular politics of the revolution and the aspects of the clergy, the students regarded him with disdain. These tensions were later raised in the following months. While Khomeini was in exile, he ordered the writing of a constitution. The Islamic Republican Party, the core members included several prominent ayatollahs, all of whom were fundamental in the creation of the constitution. Therefore, before we look at the return of Khomeini to Iran, it is important to recognize the creation of this party that was said to have first emerged in 1964. The political party represents the unification of the Islamic community that articulates dissatisfaction with Shah and became a major political force for Khomeini as it is advocating loyalty and the rule of the clergy. As Khomeini remained in exile, he was able to record his revolutionary messages on cassette tapes that were smuggled into Iran by his followers and other political allies. One by one, the tapes were spread across the mosques and universities in Iran. People were in awe with a new political figure. Such a religious country like Iran, people declared their support for the new religious leader. He was thought to be different. Some even referred to him as the shadow of God. The identity of Islam was used as a tool by Khomeini to mobilize both religious and secular segments against the Shah's regime. In February, people stormed the streets with excitement, realizing that Khomeini would return from exile. Following Khomeini's return, there were prosecutions taking place against the Shah's regime. Anyone was at risk. After the Shah's departure, he became very ill. In October, he was admitted by Jimmy Carter to an American hospital for medical treatment. Iranians feel that this visit would secure the United States' support to overthrow the Islamic Republic. On November 4, 1979, hundreds of Islamic revolutionary students headed into the streets of Tehran towards the American embassy. University students and militants marched to the embassy with the intention of recognizing a new force of radical Islam. The students took hostage 52 Americans for 444 days. This crisis took place during the wake of the Iranian Revolution. We must look back at the military coup in 1953. This coup instilled a deep resentment towards the states for the people of Iran. The capture of the embassy was a tool for anti-Americanism and the continual fight against the Shah. For the release of the hostages, the students demanded the return of the Shah to Iran for trial, the return of the Shah's blood money to the people of Iran, the promise of no more U.S. interference in Iran, and an apology from the U.S. Although the hostage crisis happened over 30 years ago, the crisis remains in the foreground of the relations between the United States and Iran today. It was a significant event because if the hostages were not taken, the U.S. could have stopped the Iraq invasion.
Sir, you are described in some circles in the press as being anti-American. Does America have anything to fear if the Shah falls?
خیر، ما به ضد ملت امریکا نیستیم. ما دولت امریکا برای اینکه پشتیبانی از شاه میکند و مخالفت با ملت ما میکند با اون مخالفیم، نه با ملت امریکا.
No, there is no reason. We are not against the American people. We are against the American people, the American government, because of their support of the brutal regime of the Shah.
خیر، رفتن شاه کفایت نمی کند. باید رژیم به هم بخورد و تمام چیزهایی که مربوط به سلطنت است از بین برد تا ما قانع بشیم.
No, just merely going is not enough. The whole monarchy, the whole regime must be changed, then we may be satisfied.
And a constitutional monarchy or something, a compromise is not in the works, is not acceptable.
خیر، مشروط سلطنتی مرزی ما نیست.
No, the constitutional monarchy is not satisfactory to us.
Following the revolution, Iran became known as the IRI, or the Islamic Republic of Iran. There were, however, two different interpretations of how the state should be formed. On one hand, there are the liberals who wanted Iran to become more westernized, with Islamic ethics and morals only being moderately enforced. On the other hand, there were those who wanted the clergy to have a more active role. This was known as the IRP, or the Islamic Republic Party, or the Maktabis. For a while, there was a period where the opposition had some political freedom. During this time, there were many different groups arguing over a variety of issues, one of which was the writing of the Constitution. The new Constitution called for a theocratic republic dominated by the Shiite clergy. However, the combination of modern and theocratic were deemed contradictory. In 1980, Iran was invaded by Iraq, beginning the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted for 8 years. And in 1981, relations between Iran and the United States were discontinued due to the hostage situation. Women's rights changed drastically during this time. In 1936, women in Iran were ordered to stop wearing veils that covered their faces. The revolution, however, reversed this and many other women's rights. In 1982, women were officially forced to wear veils. By 1981, the clerical group proclaimed all oppositional activities to be illegal and, as such, pushed the liberals out of power. As a result, Iran entered a period in which they were on the brink of civil war. During this time, the Iran-Iraq War continued to intensify and in 1982 became an offensive. By 1987, the war directly involved the United States, and in August of 1988, a UN-sponsored ceasefire finally ended the war. It was also around this time that the government began to polarize from within. Due to their war with Iraq and the American hostage situation, Iran was extremely isolated. In June of 1989, Khomeini died. However, he did not name a successor. After his death, Iran was in a state of chaos. They had just lost their leader, lost a war against Iraq, and lost all international allies. The next man to become the president of Iran was Rafsanjani, and the Rahbar was Khomeini. They changed the constitution to strengthen constitutional power and reduce the power of elected bodies. In addition, they changed the requirements so that one did not have to be an Ayatollah to become the Rahbar of Iran. This upset many people as they did not believe that Khomeini had the right religious credentials. Rafsanjani served 2 terms. During this time, he reconstructed the economic infrastructure of Iran and continued to politically repress the people. He also faced the huge task of reconstructing the nation after the Iran-Iraq War. In the early 90s, there was a brief period in which the government relaxed their policies on cultural life. This was the doing of Mohammad Khatami, the liberal-minded minister of Islamic guidance. During this time, the regulations for publications, filmmaking, arts, and other cultural activities were relaxed, allowing people to express themselves. As a result, new ideas about democracy were discussed, and there was a re-emergence of women's rights movement that focused on equal employment and educational opportunities. This period of cultural relaxation ended, however, during Rafsanjani's second term. In 1997, Mohammad Khatami was elected as president and began the period known as the Reform Movement. His campaign was designed to reach out to youth and women voters and to address their issues. Khatami wanted to expand civil society and individual liberties, improve the economy, and normalize foreign relations. Here, Khatami and his campaign leader, Mohsen Aminzadeh, explained how they won the election.
مشکلات جدی نامزد ریاست جمهوری ما بود که هم ما امکانات نداشتیم، امکانات مالی محدودی داشت و هم رسانه‌ای در اختیار نبود و نگرانی نسبت به این که بشه با مردم ارتباط برقرار کرد نگرانی مهمی بود.
و من باید روبرو و چهره به چهره با مردم همراه باشم و به همین دلیل با اتوبوس هم نوعا رفتم و تقریبا به همه مراکز استان سر زدم.
مردم برای اولین بار با کسی که می‌خواستن بهش رأی بدن ارتباط مستقیم پیدا می‌کردن.
برای خود منم تعجب آور بود در همون دیدارهای اول استقبال مردم و احساس می‌کردم که مردم یک نوع تغییر و یک نوع تحولی رو.
Khatami achieved some success in improving relations with the West, and in doing so, showed Iran's softer side.
آمریکای سخن متمدنانه تاریخی دارم و در موقعیت خودش انشاءالله با اونها طرح خواهیم کرد و سخن خواهیم گفت و امیدوارم که هرچه این گفتگوهای متفکرانه بیشتر بشه ما به صلح و
Among his achievements were creating dialogue between the Middle East and the West and improving relations with the European Union. Khatami had essentially brought an end to Iran's isolation. However, relations with the United States were still rather tense. There was some progress made, however. Both 9/11 and President Bush reversed any development. Meanwhile, Iran struggled internally. The faction in the government meant that the conservatives and the liberals were always at odds. The conservatives were still in charge of some unelected constitutional institutions, including the office of the Rabar. It was this group of conservatives who ended the reform movement. The reform movement gave the Iranian people an opportunity to open dialogue on key political and social issues. Because of this, there was a new level of political awareness and sophistication amongst Iranians. The presidency of Khatami, however, ended in 2005. In 2005, conservative-backed Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was elected as the president of Iran. Ahmadinejad wanted to return to the core values of the 1979 revolution, and so he purged many state officials and universities, asking those who supported the reform movement to leave. Under Ahmadinejad, repressive policies against independent associations, the press, and civil society increased, and the state began to use power to implement moral codes. All the improvements that Khatami had made were now reversed. While Khatami had begun to mend Iran's relationship with the West, Ahmadinejad's denial of the Holocaust and poor foreign policy isolated Iran yet again. In this clip here, we see a walkout of Ahmadinejad's speech to the UN following 9/11. For the last segment in tonight's program, we sat down with PhD student Khalad Dekanji to hear what he had to say about Iran today.
I hope so, because I don't see any point why the two countries should experience such a long political standoff, given that Rouhani is reaching out to the United States, given that Obama has seemingly shown some sign of, reaching out to countries such as Iran. So the ground seemingly seems to be prepared. But why is that not happening? I mean, it's a very complicated question and reveals the complexity of the issue and the way interests are at work. And not only the United States and Iran, like their allies are sort of involved in this conflict. Some would like to see the nature of Iranian American conflict as an example of clash of civilization. The United States being the embodiment of Western neoliberal capitalist values, and Iran be the embodiment of Messianic Islamist sort of world order of a sort. And it's because of that inherent clash at a fundamental values, that it translates itself in politics. I would like to avoid that way of explaining the Iranian-American conflict, because at the end of the day you're talking about states, and what do these states care about? They care about their interests. I mean, there are elements in the Iranian foreign policy discourse that is quote-unquote ideological, that is that is messianic, if you will, that aims to transcend the reality of day-to-day politics. Same thing in the United States, but as of right now, or what we've seen the past 20 years at least, there's been sort of weakening, I guess, of that ideological rhetoric, and the Iranian states giving in to the logic of states. Ironically enough, it's the United States and its Western allies that are not believing Iran by saying, look, we were part of the NPT, for example, we're signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, we're a rational actor, whatever, we're just like everybody else. And it's the Western sort of counterparts that are like, no, we don't have so much trust in you. See, so it seems like Iran is giving up its, I don't know how to characterize this, but it's giving up its, I guess ideological is the best word here, its ideological sort of stance and coming in terms with realpolitik, and you have the United States and its allies that are still very suspicious about that sort of change of behavior, I guess. I would hope that the relationship would be restored. That doesn't mean that Iran has given up its values, its independent sovereign rights. Ironically enough, I think if Iranian-American relations are restored, this very crawling, artificial or poisonous Americanization that is taking place in Iran, I would think would be leveled off, will be neutralized, will be cancelled out, because you, in the official discourse, you've got this staunch anti-American rhetoric, but in reality, on the ground, you've got this very intense mode of Americanization taking place in Iran. The amount of fast foods consumption, makeup consumption, gaming, kids play, computer games, whatever that you see as the embodiment of Western capitalist lifestyle is present in Iran, and to some extent it's even more intensified. I think there's a joke among Iranian diaspora that 20 years ago, if you came from Iran to Canada or the United States, you would experience a cultural clash, basically seeing how the new society is a lot more advanced. By advanced, I'm not necessarily putting it in a positive connotation. It's different technologically, culturally, and so on and so forth. And nowadays, as an Iranian, you come to Canada, United States, you still experience a cultural clash, but of the reverse kind. You come here and you basically say, why are these people so backward? Why are they not wearing the kind of clothes that we wear, like in Iran? Which is, and it's something that I've noticed myself. I've seen it in the past 15 years, the way the new immigrants relate to the society in which they're settling in is very different from those 15, 20 years ago. Yeah, as far as indigenous values are concerned, at least I hope Iran and the United States would kind of stop this irrational animosity and come in terms with themselves, come in terms with each other as actors, and get along. Yeah. I would say, as far as the realities of the state is concerned, yes. I mean, you don't have civil war in Iran, you don't have ethnic rivalries in Iran, you don't have Shias and Sunnis going at each other, killing each other for sort of sectarian differences. You don't have much of political rebels or robberies or gang violence of things of that sort in Iran. So from that perspective, from security, state apparatus security is concerned, I would say Iran is pretty stable. Now, does that mean that things are dandy and fine? Does that mean that there is no sense of opposition politically to the state? Does that mean that there is no sense of crushing alternative sort of perspectives? Absolutely not. But then the question is, where do you find that? I mean, even in Canadian context, if you go...
Thank you for tuning in to our special journey back to the Iranian Revolution of 1979. From all of us at AKBH Studios, good night.